Time seemed to slow as Sarah controlled her breathing and steadied her aim. Through her scope, she could see the first target climbing into the passenger seat of a pickup truck. The man's face was clearly visible in the compound's floodlights. This was Ahmad Hassan, a bomb maker responsible for over 50 American deaths. Her crosshairs centered on his chest. Commander Thompson's voice crackled through the radio, sharp with urgency. His team was taking heavy fire and needed immediate extraction. He couldn't see what Sarah was seeing from her elevated position. The enemy leaders were seconds away from driving into the darkness where they would vanish forever. The mission was about to become a complete failure. Sarah's training took over. She had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times on shooting ranges and in simulations. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and everything around her seemed to fade away except the target in her scope. The distance was 847 meters according to her rangefinder. Wind was minimal but shifting slightly from the northwest. She made tiny adjustments to compensate. The first shot rang out across the valley like thunder. Ahmad Hassan dropped immediately, his body crumpling against the truck door. The sound echoed off the mountain walls, confusing the enemy fighters about where the shot had come from. They looked around frantically, searching the darkness for muzzle flashes that Sarah's flash suppressor had hidden. The second target, Khalil, Nazir, was already moving toward another vehicle when Sarah's bullet found him. The shot was perfect, dropping him instantly before he could reach cover. 2 targets down in less than 10 seconds. But the third man was reacting quickly to the sniper fire. He was running toward the main building, using guards as human shields. Sarah tracked the third target through her scope as he zigzagged across the compound. This was the most dangerous of the 3 leaders, a man named Omar Rashid who commanded several hundred fighters across the region. He was smart and experienced, already shouting orders to his men while moving unpredictably to avoid sniper fire. The angle was becoming difficult as Rashid moved closer to the buildings. Sarah had to adjust her position slightly, shifting her weight while maintaining her sight picture. Through her earpiece, she could hear the intensity of the firefight below. Commander Thompson's team was still pinned down, but the enemy fighters were starting to panic from the precision sniper fire. Rashid made a mistake. Instead of continuing toward the building, he stopped to grab a radio from one of his dead guards. For just a moment, he was stationary and exposed. Sarah's third shot traveled nearly half a mile through the mountain air before finding its target. Omar Rashid collapsed, and the compound suddenly went quiet except for scattered gunfire. The psychological effect on the remaining fighters was immediate and dramatic. Their 3 leaders were dead, killed by an invisible sniper who seemed capable of hitting any target regardless of distance or cover. Some of the guards began fleeing immediately. Others took defensive positions but seemed confused and leaderless. Commander Thompson's voice came through the radio with new urgency, but this time it was different. He was requesting information about what Sarah could see from her position. The tactical situation had changed completely. Instead of being pinned down by organized resistance, his team was now facing scattered and demoralized fighters who were more interested in escaping than fighting. Sarah provided detailed intelligence about enemy positions and movements. She could see fighters abandoning their posts and vehicles, fleeing the compound in different directions. Her elevated position gave her a perfect view of the entire area, making her an invaluable asset for coordinating the SEAL team's movements. The compound was secured within 20 minutes. Commander Thompson's team moved systematically through the buildings, finding documents, computers, and communications equipment that would provide valuable intelligence about enemy operations. The 3 bodies were confirmed as the primary targets, and photos were transmitted to headquarters for positive identification. As dawn broke over the mountains, Sarah finally left her sniper position. She had remained motionless for over 6 hours, maintaining constant surveillance while the SEAL team completed their search. Her legs were cramped and her shoulders ached, but her rifle was still ready for action if needed. The helicopter extraction went smoothly. Commander Thompson sat beside Sarah during the flight back to base, but his demeanor had changed completely. The skeptical, dismissive attitude was gone, replaced by professional respect. He didn't say much during the flight, but his expression showed he was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about female soldiers in combat. Back at base, the mission debriefing was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Senior officers who had barely acknowledged her existence were suddenly very interested in her tactics and observations. The 3 confirmed kills at long range, under combat conditions, had impressed people who were difficult to impress. Intelligence gathered from the compound was proving extremely valuable. The dead leaders had been planning coordinated attacks on multiple coalition bases. Their communications revealed networks of fighters and supply routes that intelligence agencies hadn't known existed. The mission had prevented potentially hundreds of coalition casualties. Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the special operations community. Soldiers who had been skeptical about women in combat roles were forced to confront the reality of what she had accomplished. 3 enemy leaders eliminated with 3 shots from nearly half a mile away, while their own fighters were in direct contact with the enemy. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. One successful mission didn't change decades of military culture and skepticism. She would have to prove herself again and again, probably for the rest of her career. Some people would always see her as an exception, rather than an example of what women could accomplish in combat. The helicopter flew low through the Afghan mountains, its rotors cutting through the thin air. Sarah checked her equipment one more time. Her rifle was a custom-built weapon that had never failed her in training. The scope was perfectly zeroed, and she carried enough ammunition for any reasonable scenario. But this mission was far from reasonable. Commander Jake Thompson sat across from her in the helicopter, his weathered face showing years of combat experience. He led one of the most elite SEAL teams in the military, and he clearly wasn't happy about having a woman on his team. During the pre-mission briefings, he had questioned every aspect of her inclusion. Why risk an unproven female soldier when experienced male snipers were available? His doubts were obvious to everyone, including Sarah. The mission target was a compound in the remote mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Intelligence reports indicated that 3 high-ranking enemy leaders were meeting there to plan coordinated attacks against American forces. These weren't ordinary fighters. They were experienced commanders who had been evading capture for years, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of coalition soldiers. The plan was complex and dangerous. Sarah would position herself on a ridge overlooking the compound approximately 800 meters away. The SEAL team would approach from the opposite direction, creating a diversion to flush the targets into the open. Sarah would have seconds to identify and eliminate all 3 leaders before they could escape or call for reinforcements. Intelligence was always imperfect in these situations. They knew the general layout of the compound and had photos of the 3 targets, but everything else was uncertain. How many guards were present? What weapons did they have? Were there civilians in the area? These questions would only be answered when the mission began. As they approached the landing zone, Commander Thompson's voice crackled through the radio. His instructions were clear and direct. Sarah was to observe and report, taking shots only when specifically ordered. She was not to engage targets without permission, even if she had clear shots. His lack of confidence in her abilities was crystal clear. The helicopter landed in a clearing several kilometers from the target. The team moved out immediately, with Sarah splitting off to reach her sniper position, while the SEALs approached the compound. The terrain was rough and rocky, perfect for concealment but challenging to navigate in darkness. Sarah moved carefully, using night vision equipment to avoid obstacles and potential threats. Reaching her position required climbing a steep, rocky slope while carrying her rifle and equipment. The elevation made breathing difficult, and the temperature was dropping rapidly as night fell. Sarah found a natural hide among the rocks that provided excellent visibility of the compound below, while keeping her completely concealed. Setting up her rifle took several minutes of careful adjustment. The distance was at the far end of her effective range, requiring precise calculations for wind speed, air density, and target movement. She used a laser rangefinder to confirm the exact distance to various points around the compound, then adjusted her scope accordingly. Through her scope, Sarah could see the compound clearly. It was larger than intelligence reports had indicated, with several buildings and multiple entry points. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, but their movement patterns were predictable. She counted at least 12 fighters, all carrying automatic weapons. Commander Thompson's voice came through her earpiece, reporting that his team was in position. They had identified additional security measures that weren't in the intelligence briefing. The compound had motion sensors and was more heavily defended than expected. The mission was becoming more complex by the minute. The first sign of trouble came when dogs started barking inside the compound. Someone had detected the approaching SEAL team earlier than planned. Lights came on in several buildings, and guards began moving with purpose, rather than routine patrols. The element of surprise was compromised. Sarah watched through her scope as 3 men emerged from the main building. Even at this distance, she could identify them from the intelligence photos. These were the targets, all 3 primary objectives in one location. But they were surrounded by guards and moving quickly toward waiting vehicles. Commander Thompson's voice was tense in her earpiece. His team was pinned down by enemy fire and couldn't get close enough to engage the targets. The leaders were about to escape, and there was no way to stop them except through long-range precision fire. This was exactly the scenario Sarah had trained for, but she was under strict orders not to shoot without permission. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Enemy reinforcements were arriving from other locations, and the SEAL team was outnumbered and outgunned. In minutes, the targets would be gone and the mission would be a complete failure. Sarah had clear shots at all 3 leaders, but Commander Thompson was focused on extracting his team safely. Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. She keyed her radio and calmly reported what she could see and what shots were available. Her voice was steady and professional, providing exact details about target positions and movement patterns. She wasn't asking for permission anymore. She was providing information for the commander to make an informed decision. The compound was erupting in chaos. Automatic weapons fire echoed through the mountains as the SEAL team fought for their lives. The 3 enemy leaders were climbing into vehicles, seconds away from escaping into the night where they could disappear forever. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger, her crosshairs steady on the first target despite the stress and adrenaline flooding her system. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her friends played with dolls, she practiced shooting cans off fence posts with her grandfather's old rifle. Her father, a retired Marine, taught her that being small didn't mean being weak. But even he raised his eyebrows when she announced her plan to join the Navy and become a sniper. The recruitment office buzzed with young men flexing their muscles and talking big. Sarah walked in wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt, her long black hair tied back in a ponytail. The recruiter looked her up and down, clearly skeptical. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 120 pounds, she didn't look like warrior material. But her test scores were perfect, and her marksmanship records from civilian competitions were impressive enough to get attention from the right people. Boot camp was brutal. The drill instructors seemed to take special pleasure in making her life difficult. They made her carry extra weight, do more push-ups, and run longer distances than the men. Some of her fellow recruits whispered that she was getting special treatment, though it was clearly the opposite. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed through every challenge. She finished in the top 5% of her class. When she applied for sniper training, the rejection came swift and harsh. Women weren't allowed in combat roles, they said. The rules were the rules. But Sarah had done her homework. She knew about a small experimental program that was quietly testing female soldiers in specialized roles. It took 6 months of paperwork, interviews, and political maneuvering, but she finally got her chance. The Advanced Marksmanship School was located in a classified location in Nevada. Sarah arrived to find herself the only woman among 30 elite soldiers. The men came from Rangers, Green Berets, and Marine Force recon units. They looked at her like she was lost. The head instructor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, made it clear he thought the whole thing was a waste of time and resources. The first week focused on basic shooting skills that Sarah had mastered years ago, but the instructors pushed everyone to their limits. They had to hit targets at distances most people couldn't even see clearly. They practiced in all weather conditions, day and night, with different weapons and ammunition types. Sarah's small frame actually gave her advantages. She could get into shooting positions that larger soldiers couldn't manage. Her steady hands and exceptional eyesight made her shots consistently accurate. But accuracy wasn't enough. Snipers needed to be invisible, patient, and mentally tough. They spent days lying motionless in uncomfortable positions, waiting for the perfect shot opportunity. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for reading wind patterns and calculating bullet trajectory. While other students relied heavily on technology, she could make complex calculations in her head. The psychological pressure was intense. Instructors would create stressful situations to test how students performed under pressure. They used loud noises, bright lights, and verbal harassment to simulate combat conditions. Many strong soldiers cracked under this pressure, but Sarah remained calm and focused. Her shots stayed accurate even when instructors were shouting inches from her ear. As weeks passed, some of the male students began to respect her abilities. Others remained resentful, believing she was taking a spot that should belong to a man. The instructors maintained their skeptical attitude, always watching for any sign of weakness or failure. Sarah knew she had to be twice as good as everyone else just to be considered equal. The final phase of training involved live fire exercises with real tactical scenarios. Students worked in teams, with snipers providing overwatch and precision fire support. Sarah's small size allowed her to move through terrain that others couldn't navigate quietly. Her shots were consistently on target, even in challenging conditions. When graduation day arrived, Sarah had finished second in her class, overall and first in several individual categories, but instead of celebration, she faced an uncertain future. The military still wasn't ready to officially deploy female snipers in combat roles. She was assigned to a training unit, teaching marksmanship to other soldiers. It felt like being put on a shelf after proving she belonged in the game. For 2 years, Sarah trained others while watching male snipers deploy to combat zones. She read every after-action report she could access, studying enemy tactics and successful missions. She maintained her skills by competing in military shooting competitions, where she consistently outperformed male competitors. But she wanted real missions, real chances to prove herself in actual combat. The opportunity finally came through an unexpected source. A classified special operations unit was forming for a particularly dangerous mission in Afghanistan. They needed someone with exceptional marksmanship skills who could also blend in with local populations when necessary. Sarah's language skills and small stature made her an ideal candidate for infiltration work. The mission briefing was unlike anything she had experienced. This wasn't about supporting regular infantry units or protecting bases. This was about hunting specific high-value targets in enemy territory. The kind of work where one missed shot could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. It was exactly what Sarah had trained for her entire military career. The success of Sarah's first mission created unexpected problems. News of the operation spread through military channels faster than classified information should travel. Everyone wanted to know about the female sniper who had saved a SEAL team and eliminated 3 high-value targets with perfect accuracy. Sarah found herself suddenly famous within the special operations community. But fame wasn't what she wanted. Commander Thompson requested Sarah for his next 3 missions. His attitude toward her had changed completely after witnessing her performance in combat. During mission planning sessions, he asked for her input on tactics and positioning. Other team members who had initially viewed her with suspicion began treating her as a valuable team member rather than a liability. The second mission took place in a dense urban environment where traditional sniper tactics were nearly impossible. Sarah had to adapt her techniques for close-range precision shooting in crowded city streets. The target was a bomb maker who was meeting contacts in a busy marketplace. One missed shot could kill innocent civilians and create an international incident. Sarah positioned herself on a rooftop overlooking the market, using her small size to hide behind air conditioning equipment that wouldn't conceal larger soldiers. The target appeared exactly as intelligence had predicted, but he was surrounded by women and children. Sarah had to wait nearly 2 hours for a clean shot opportunity, remaining motionless despite cramped muscles and burning heat. When the shot opportunity finally came, it lasted only seconds. The target stepped away from the crowd to light a cigarette, presenting a brief window where Sarah could engage without risk to civilians. Her bullet traveled through a narrow gap between market stalls, striking the bomb maker precisely in the chest. He dropped instantly, and the crowd initially didn't realize what had happened. The third mission was even more challenging. The target was hiding in a cave complex where conventional forces couldn't reach him. Sarah had to climb to a position over 9,000 feet above sea level, in freezing temperatures, while carrying her rifle and enough supplies for a 3-day mission. The thin air made every movement exhausting, and the cold threatened to affect her rifle's accuracy. She spent 2 days watching the cave entrance before the target finally appeared. The shot distance was over 200 meters, near the maximum effective range of her rifle in the thin mountain air. Sarah had to calculate not just wind and distance, but also the effects of altitude on bullet trajectory. Her shot was perfect, eliminating a leader who had been evading capture for over 2 years. By the 4th mission, Sarah had earned a reputation as one of the most effective snipers in the military. Other special operations units were requesting her for their missions. She was no longer the experimental female soldier trying to prove herself. She was becoming a sought-after specialist whose skills were in high demand. But success brought new challenges. Military bureaucrats who had initially opposed women in combat were now trying to take credit for her achievements. They claimed her success proved their progressive policies were working, while continuing to block other women from similar opportunities. Sarah found herself caught between being a symbol and being a soldier. The media attention was becoming problematic. Despite official secrecy about special operations, stories about the female sniper were appearing in newspapers and magazines. Some reports were wildly inaccurate, portraying her as either a superhuman warrior or a publicity stunt. Sarah preferred operating in the shadows, where she could focus on missions rather than politics. Commander Thompson understood her frustration and worked to shield her from the worst of the attention. He assigned her to missions where her gender would be less likely to overshadow her tactical contributions. But the military was changing around them, and traditional attitudes were being challenged by the undeniable evidence of Sarah's effectiveness. Training programs began incorporating techniques that Sarah had developed for small-statured snipers. Her methods for achieving stability in confined shooting positions were being taught to male soldiers who had previously dismissed such tactics. Military equipment manufacturers started designing gear specifically for smaller soldiers, recognizing an overlooked market. Other women in the military began reaching out to Sarah for advice and mentorship. She received letters from female soldiers asking how to overcome the barriers she had faced. Sarah realized she had become more than just a sniper. She had become a pioneer, whose success was opening doors for other women. The psychological impact of her missions extended beyond immediate tactical success. Enemy fighters became paranoid about invisible female snipers who could strike from impossible distances. Intelligence reports indicated that terrorist organizations were struggling to recruit local supporters who feared being targeted by American female soldiers they couldn't detect or counter. Sarah's reputation grew with each successful mission, but she remained focused on improving her skills rather than enjoying recognition. She spent her off-duty time studying ballistics, practicing new shooting positions, and developing techniques for operating in different environments. Her dedication to continuous improvement impressed even veteran special operations soldiers. The military establishment was slowly accepting that Sarah's success wasn't an anomaly or lucky break. She had consistently performed at the highest levels under the most challenging conditions. Her gender, which had initially been seen as a weakness, was proving to be an advantage in many tactical situations where smaller soldiers could operate more effectively. As word of her achievements spread internationally, foreign military units began expressing interest in training programs based on her methods. Allied forces wanted to learn how American forces were utilizing female soldiers so effectively in combat roles. Sarah found herself inadvertently influencing military policies in countries around the world. The mission that would define Sarah's legacy came during her 8th deployment with Commander Thompson's team. Intelligence had identified a gathering of enemy leaders planning a massive coordinated attack against multiple American bases. This wasn't just another high-value target mission. This was an opportunity to prevent potentially thousands of casualties and disrupt enemy operations across the entire region. The target location was a fortified compound in the remote mountains of eastern Afghanistan, surrounded by natural barriers and defended by over 100 experienced fighters. Previous attempts to raid this location had failed, resulting in casualties and allowing enemy leaders to escape. Conventional military approaches wouldn't work against such a well-defended position. The mission planning took weeks of careful preparation. Satellite imagery revealed multiple defensive positions, underground bunkers, and escape routes that made traditional assault tactics nearly impossible. The compound's location in a narrow valley meant that helicopter insertions would be detected immediately, and ground approaches could be observed from miles away. Sarah proposed a completely different approach. Instead of trying to assault the compound directly, her team would position themselves on the high ridges surrounding the valley. From these elevated positions, they could observe all movement in and out of the compound while maintaining the element of surprise. But the shooting distances would be extreme, over 1,500 meters in some cases. Commander Thompson was initially skeptical about the long-range approach. Those distances were beyond what most military snipers could achieve consistently, especially in the thin mountain air and unpredictable wind conditions. But Sarah had proven herself capable of making shots that others considered impossible, and conventional tactics had already failed multiple times. The infiltration required climbing to positions over 10,000 feet above sea level while carrying heavy equipment. Sarah's team included 2 other snipers and a spotter, but she would be responsible for the most difficult shots due to her demonstrated accuracy at extreme ranges. They had to reach their positions undetected and remain hidden for potentially several days. The climb took over 12 hours through treacherous terrain in complete darkness. Sarah carried her custom rifle, enough ammunition for any reasonable scenario, cold weather gear, food and water for 3 days. The weight of the equipment combined with the altitude made every step exhausting, but stopping to rest could compromise their timeline. Reaching the final shooting position required technical climbing skills that weren't normally part of sniper training. Sarah had to rope climb up a sheer rock face while her rifle and equipment were hauled up separately. One slip would mean death, and the sound of falling rocks could alert enemy sentries in the valley below. The hide position was a narrow ledge barely wide enough for Sarah and her spotter to lie prone. They had to remain completely motionless during daylight hours, as any movement could be spotted by enemy observers with binoculars. The temperature was well below freezing, and the wind was strong enough to affect bullet trajectory significantly. Through her scope, Sarah could observe the compound in detail. The intelligence reports had been accurate about the basic layout, but there were more defensive positions than expected. She counted over 150 fighters moving around the compound, all carrying military-grade weapons. This was clearly a major gathering of enemy leadership. On the second day, the primary targets began arriving. Sarah's team observed vehicles carrying known terrorist leaders from across the region. These weren't just local commanders, but international figures responsible for planning attacks in multiple countries. The intelligence value of eliminating so many high-ranking enemies in one operation would be unprecedented. The shooting conditions were extremely challenging. The distance to most targets exceeded 1,400 meters, requiring precise calculations for bullet drop, wind drift, and the effects of altitude on projectile flight. Sarah's spotter worked continuously to measure wind conditions and provide range estimates, but the final shooting decisions would depend on her experience and intuition. Weather conditions were deteriorating as a storm system moved through the mountains. Wind speeds were increasing and snow flurries were beginning to affect visibility. Sarah realized they might only have one opportunity to engage the targets before the weather made accurate shooting impossible. The moment came during a meeting between 6 of the most wanted terrorist leaders in the region. They gathered outside the main building, apparently confident that their remote location and heavy defenses made them safe from attack. Sarah had clear lines of sight to all 6 targets, but the shots would have to be taken in rapid succession before they could react and take cover. Sarah's first shot traveled over 1,450 meters through the thin mountain air before striking the primary target in the chest. The man dropped immediately, but the sound of the shot wouldn't reach the compound for several seconds due to the distance involved. She had time for additional shots before anyone realized what was happening. Her second and third shots were fired within 10 seconds of the first, eliminating 2 more high-value targets before any of the enemy fighters understood they were under attack. The psychological impact on the remaining leaders was immediate and devastating. They were being killed by an invisible enemy who could strike from an impossible distance. The compound erupted in chaos as fighters searched frantically for the source of the sniper fire. Sarah continued engaging targets methodically, her shots precisely placed despite the extreme range and deteriorating weather conditions. Each bullet represented months of training and years of experience, fired with mechanical precision that seemed almost supernatural to the enemy fighters below. Within 3 minutes, Sarah had eliminated 8 high-value targets and created such panic among the enemy forces that many were abandoning their positions and fleeing into the mountains. The gathering of terrorist leaders had been completely disrupted, and intelligence later confirmed that several planned attacks were cancelled due to the elimination of key commanders. The extraction from the mountain position was as dangerous as the infiltration had been. Sarah's team had to descend over 10,000 feet of treacherous terrain while carrying all their equipment, and enemy forces were actively searching for them throughout the region. The successful mission had eliminated 8 high-value targets, but it had also revealed the presence of American Special Operations Forces in the area. Commander Thompson coordinated the extraction personally, understanding that Sarah's survival was now crucial to future operations. Her demonstrated ability to engage targets at extreme ranges had proven invaluable, and losing her would be a significant tactical loss for American forces. The helicopter pickup had to be conducted under combat conditions, with enemy fighters converging on their location. The flight back to base was tense but successful. Sarah had proven once again that her skills were unmatched, even under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The mission debriefing revealed that her 8 confirmed kills had disrupted terrorist operations across the entire region. Planned attacks against American forces were canceled because the leadership structure had been decimated. Word of this mission spread through the highest levels of military command. Sarah's ability to eliminate multiple high-value targets from extreme distances had strategic implications beyond just tactical success. Enemy forces were becoming reluctant to gather in large groups, knowing that American snipers could strike from ranges they had previously considered safe. The psychological impact on terrorist organizations was profound and lasting. Sarah had become a legendary figure among enemy fighters, feared for her ability to strike from impossible distances with perfect accuracy. Intelligence reports indicated that some terrorist groups were changing their operational procedures specifically to counter the threat posed by American female snipers. Commander Thompson was promoted and given command of a larger special operations unit. His first request was to have Sarah permanently assigned to his team as his primary sniper. The official paperwork described her as an essential asset, whose unique skills were critical to mission success. The skeptical officer who had once doubted her abilities was now her strongest advocate. The military establishment could no longer ignore the evidence of Sarah's effectiveness. Policy changes began filtering through the command structure, opening combat roles to women who could meet the same standards required of male soldiers. Sarah's success had forced institutional change that political pressure alone had been unable to achieve. Training programs were restructured to incorporate techniques that Sarah had developed and proven in combat. Her methods for achieving accuracy at extreme ranges were being taught to male snipers across all service branches. Military doctrine was being rewritten to include tactical approaches that utilize smaller soldiers in roles previously reserved for larger men. Other women in the military found new opportunities opening because of Sarah's achievements. Female soldiers who had been limited to support roles were being considered for combat positions based on their individual abilities rather than their gender. The barriers that had seemed insurmountable were beginning to crumble under the weight of documented success. International military units began requesting training exchanges to learn American techniques for utilizing female soldiers in combat roles. Allied forces recognized that they were missing opportunities by excluding women from specialized units. Sarah found herself inadvertently influencing military policies in countries around the world. The media attention continued despite official attempts to maintain operational security. Stories about the female sniper who had revolutionized special operations appeared in newspapers and magazines worldwide. Some reports were sensationalized and inaccurate, but the basic facts were undeniable. Sarah had achieved results that few soldiers of any gender could match. Sarah remained focused on her mission rather than her fame. She continued training, studying, and improving her techniques with the same dedication that had brought her initial success. Each mission brought new challenges and opportunities to develop innovative approaches to problems that had previously seemed unsolvable. The equipment manufacturers who had initially ignored the needs of smaller soldiers were now competing to develop gear specifically for female special operations personnel. Sarah's input was sought for designing everything from rifles to tactical gear, optimized for soldiers who didn't fit traditional size parameters. Her influence was changing not just military policy, but also the industry that supported it. Enemy forces adapted their tactics in response to Sarah's success, but their adaptations often created new vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The psychological pressure of knowing they could be eliminated from extreme ranges made terrorist leaders more cautious and less effective in coordinating operations. Fear of American female snipers was becoming a strategic weapon in itself. Commander Thompson's team continued operating at the highest levels of special operations, with Sarah as their primary sniper. Her reputation had evolved from experimental female soldier to legendary warrior whose skills were unquestioned. The doubts that had once surrounded her participation in combat operations had been completely erased by years of successful missions. The transformation was complete. Sarah had not only proven that women could succeed in the most challenging military roles, but had demonstrated that diversity in special operations could provide tactical advantages that homogeneous units couldn't achieve. Her small stature, steady nerves, and exceptional marksmanship had combined to create capabilities that larger, traditionally trained soldiers couldn't match. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of special operations tactics, Sarah's missions would be recognized as turning points that changed how modern militaries approached personnel selection and tactical planning. The SEAL commander who had once doubted her abilities would write in his memoirs that working with Sarah had taught him more about the nature of courage and competence than any other experience in his military career. The girl from Texas who had practiced shooting cans off fence posts had become one of the most effective snipers in military history, proving that determination, skill, and dedication were more important than conforming to traditional expectations. Her legacy would inspire future generations of soldiers while demonstrating that excellence has no gender boundaries in the crucible of combat.